let's go back over here. One little statistic. People today are getting married later, and it is having huge repercussions because the average person graduating from high school or college today is no longer graduating with what I like to call an MRS degree. Are we tracking? But rather, they're graduating from college, and they're often saddled down in debt. They're single, and they're often needing not just a job, but a career. And so often, to find that kind of incredible job opportunity, they're moving out of the home, and maybe they're moving across the town, or they're moving to a different city or a different state. And so they pack up, and they have to find a place or someone to live with. And so they end up making connection on Facebook with somebody's friends, uncles, sisters, daughter who has a spare room that they can rent, and so they pack up and they move to this distant town, and they find their place to live, and they're kind of getting settled in, and they go to their first job, and they find that one of two things happens. Number one, that they already know how to do everything, and they are bored out of their mind. Or number two, they don't know how to do anything, and they are completely stressed out of their mind. They are given all these opportunities, whether it's a 401k, which they wonder whether it's a license plate, and all kinds of decisions that they have to make about their future benefits, and they're trying to struggle through this. And meanwhile, maybe they were raised in the church, and they want a vibrant relationship with God, and they wonder, where do I go to church? And if they don't have anybody to tell them, then what they do is they all go to the same place, and that is the Yellow Pages, which is why you all need to spring for great big ads that are well designed in the local Yellow Pages. They open up the Yellow Pages, they go down the line, and they say, well, that church might be pretty great. And they go and they get brave enough to check it out. They get dressed up, they walk into your church, they sit down, and the strangest phenomena happens. Nobody sits beside them. And you all have seen this happen. And so they sit through the service, they get up to go, and maybe on the way out, somebody introduces themselves and says, so how are you doing? To which this young, maybe woman who has a great outfit, a fabulous haircut, and a very cute Kate Spade bag looks and says, I am doing fine. Everything is great. And I am looking at her and thinking, liar, liar, pants on fire. You have so much going on in your life as you're trying to struggle through and sort through things professionally, for your future, for your career, for possibly that person who you're waiting to marry or get into a relationship with. All these different things are bubbling in your mind, and while you look fabulous on the outside, there are some deep and difficult questions that you are asking on the inside. What does that mean for you as a mission who is committed to reaching the next generation? I think that it's important to recognize that within this generation, the entire life script has been rewritten. My mom married at the age of 19, and I married at the age of 29. And there was a whole lot of years in there when I had a lot of questions that there weren't answers for. I'd call my mom and I'd be like, Mom, I'm pursuing a relationship with God. I'm keeping myself pure. I'm trusting that God's going to bring that one, but where is he? And my mom didn't have any answers. I remember on Valentine's Day when I was 27 years old, my grandmother called, well-meaning, and she said, Margaret, have you found anybody special? And I was like, well, Grandma, I haven't. And she said, well, it's okay to be an old maid. Not recognizing just how quickly this life script has changed. Often the church is struggling to keep up because most churches in America have been built on the paradigm that when you get married, and preferably when you have children, then we know what to do with you. And this often plays out into the bulletin, that when the young adult comes into your church and opens it up and they go, wow, there's a Valentine's Day dinner, and there's a marriage retreat, and there's a youth group, and there's something for children's ministry, and they look, but they don't see anything for them. And all too often what they're doing is they're closing the brochure and they're walking back out the doors of the church, which is why it is so essential that as a movement that we begin opening up opportunities for young adult ministry. Recognize that this is not a population that wants to be called single. Ooh, that is a word that defines not what you It defines what you don't have rather than what God has empowered and given you. And so there is an entire group of people coming of age who want to be known as young professionals. They want to be known as college and career. They want to be outwardly focused, missionally focused, and they want people to be able to recognize the unique gifts and talents that they have been given by God. And as leaders, we have an incredible opportunity to speak into that. The second thing that I noticed as I did my research on this generation is something that many of you may have noticed as well. And that is that this generation is in greater debt than any generation before them. The average college graduate today graduates with about $18,000 in student loan debt and $4,000 in credit card debt. In fact, 1 out of 10 college students graduates with more than $35,000 in debt. So when they get their diploma, they are not starting at zero. They are starting way down in the hole. As I started to look at this, I started to ask the question, well, why isn't there more free money? Because when I graduated from high school, the encouragement from my parents was go out and get a scholarship, go out and get a grant. And I really struggled to find any free money. And as I started to research this, I began to recognize why. And that is that the amount of grants that are being given out to college students is rapidly decreasing. In 1975, the average Pell Grant picked up 47% of a 4-year public college bill. Today, that same grant averages 25%. So in a time when college costs are going through the roof, the amount of free money being given out is actually decreasing. What does this mean to you as a mission who is committed to reaching the next generation? Well, I think that if you haven't figured it out by now, that the young adults within your community are probably not going to be the cash cow of your church. Are we tracking? And yet, even though this generation often is saddled in greater debt, make no mistake that I believe that this is an incredibly generous generation. If you ask them to give to something that is non-specific, an institution, some list of bills, often they're not going to respond. But if you can make your ask for giving about a person, if somehow you can make it personal, you will be blown away by how deep this generation reaches into their pockets in order to give. I experienced this when we were living in Sitka, Alaska. There was a group of a young adult community, probably of about 20 or 25, and most of them were working just minimum wage jobs in Alaska, a place that has a tremendously high cost of living. And one summer, one of the girls in the group had gone and volunteered at a Christian camp, and while she was there, she had twisted her ankle and ended up having some surgery that had to be done to repair it. Unfortunately, she didn't have health insurance, and the camp couldn't cover it. And so she came back, and over the next year was just saddled and also just scared of the amount of debt that she was in. And a group of these friends got together, people who were just working minimum wage jobs, and in one evening just reached into their pockets and began writing checks and gave her over $4,000 to wipe out her medical bills. All because they weren't just giving to a cause, they were giving to something that was personal and an actual person. So make no mistake, we are reaching out to an outrageously generous group of people. But also recognize that because that generosity may not manifest itself as consistently or in the ways that we anticipate, that I believe that it becomes all that more important that as you, as communities, reach out to this generation, that you have the buy-in of your leadership. How do you get the buy-in of your leadership? I believe that for those of us who are on the front lines of working with this next generation, that number one, we must always speak well of our leadership. We must always honor those who are above us. We must take every opportunity that even when young adult communities are gathering, that we would involve our leaders in the conversation even when they're not in the room. Demonstrate how their pastoring and how their leadership should be thought of in a daily basis. I think, secondly, it's important to play to your leader's strengths. In other words, find out what the leaders of your church are really good at and set them up for success. I had a friend who was a leader in California, and the young adult community really had a hard time connecting with their senior pastor. The leader happened to be more of a CEO type, and he was very business-oriented. And as you know, most young adults are very much driven by relationship. We love snuggly, soft people who we can just hang out with on the couch until 2 a.m. And this CEO-type pastor was not that way at all. And so the young adult leader, forward-thinking, thought, wait a second, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to actually have him come speak to my young adults, but I'm going to set him up for success. I'm going to ask the young adult community to put together a list of 10 or 15 questions, which I am going to give to the leader before he comes so he can have clever, snappy answers. I'm going to limit the amount of time to 20 or 30 minutes so that he's set up for success. So he comes in, he knows the questions, he offers brilliant answers, everybody laughs, everybody's engaged. He leaves a hero, all because the leader of the young adult community set up the leadership for success. And I think the third thing that is crucial in order to get the buy-in of that leadership is to make your community known for something extraordinary. You see, I believe that young adults want to be missionally oriented. They want to put their faith into action. They're actually chomping at the bit for those kinds of opportunities. So not only acknowledge what they're good at, but empower them to do it. There's a church in Texas that we're familiar with, and the young adult community within that church, that is the group within the church who is known for feeding the widows, for taking care of the poor, for being out at the Habitat House. When it comes to putting the faith into action, it's those young people who are in the front lines in the church. Another example of this is a church we know in Seattle, Washington, where they have a young adult community within it and a college pastor. And one day the college pastor decided that every week that the small groups were meeting, that on the fourth week of the month, that they would actually not meet and go out and just see a way that they could put their faith into action and serve. Well, the senior pastor calls in the college leader and he says, what are you doing? You know that within our church we're supposed to have small group meetings every week, and you're only doing it 3 times a month. And he says, well, I just thought it was important that we go out and serve in tangible ways. And you know what? We've been out at the soup kitchen. We've been out, even at the library. We've been out in all these different areas in our community making a difference. And you know what the senior pastor said? That's a great idea. I'm going to make that a church-wide initiative. And so all of a sudden you find the young adults within a community spearheading change and growth and an outward missional focus within their areas.